Greetings, VFI news supporters and anyone else watching this report. It's been another amazing week here in Israel with ongoing operations against Hamas and Hezbollah. Yes, overshadowed by a very close call. That's right, because a ballistic missile was fired by the Houthis in Yemen, almost hitting Ben Gurion Airport. Actually, it missed the terminal, but did hit the grounds of the airport, and about 7 people were injured. Now, the Israeli Air Force was quick to respond in a strike that was historic, as it was the first time American and Israeli conventional forces launched joint offensive operations against a common enemy. Well, we'll have all the details about that, plus yet another large-scale call-up of IDF reservists, flash floods in the Negev, teacher strikes, and much more. It's all coming ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. The big story this week is that on Sunday morning, a ballistic missile fired by the Houthis in Yemen managed to elude an attempt to intercept it by both the Arrow 3 air defense system and the THAAD system, and impacted here in Israel. The missile hit in a small field just a few hundred meters from one of the main terminals in the airport, resulting in a large crater and kicking up a massive cloud of dirt, rock, and debris, some of which hit and moderately injured at least 6 people, maybe 7. Now, as bad as that is, it is very important to point out what did not happen here. There was no explosion, but just a kinetic impact. A ballistic missile like this one is designed to carry a warhead containing about 300 kilograms of high explosives, which would, if detonated, produce a massive explosion that would have produced much more than a large crater in the earth. In fact, it probably would have at least done serious damage to the terminal that it hit nearby and any airplanes and other vehicles, not to mention people, who were within a radius of around 500 meters or so. Certainly, all the trees and vegetation near the impact site would have been burned up and the ground itself, including the rocks and soil, would have been charred and blackened. But if you watch the videos and the images of the impact site taken minutes after the impact, you'll see that the vegetation is all still green and the rocks and soil are being blessed and are also not blackened, as would have been the case had there been a successful explosion. Now, there are 2 possibilities here. Either the warhead was a dud, which is possible but unlikely. No debris of an unexploded warhead was visible in the videos we see of the impact site, or there was no warhead in the missile at all. So that leaves us with a question. Why would the Houthis bother to fire a rocket all the way from Yemen to Israel but not load an explosive warhead on it? Good question. One possibility is that they simply don't have any more warheads, despite still having some missiles. And there is precedent for this, but we'd have to go back to 1990 when a U.S.-led coalition was trying to push the Iraqi army out of Kuwait in what became known to history as Gulf War I. Now, if you remember, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, or insane I call him, was launching Scud missiles at Israel because he thought that by attacking Israel, he might provoke Arab countries to switch sides that were joining already the U.S.-led coalition. Well, that didn't work out for him. But Israel, in a decision that was controversial at the time, held back on retaliating and let the American soldiers who had been stationed in Israel, along with their Patriot air defense systems, shoot down the incoming Scuds. They had limited success, and several Scuds got through, causing millions of dollars worth of damage, but only a few casualties. But towards the end of the war, the Scuds that were shot down, and even a few that got through, were found to be without warheads. Instead, they were sent over with the compartment that should have had a warhead in it, filled up with cement, was I guess just for a big blast. However, the Scud missiles carrying a cement warhead had very different flight characteristics from what the missiles carrying an explosive warhead did, and so they proved to be even more difficult for the Patriot system to hit because the radar and computers were calibrated to track and intercept missiles carrying a warhead. Go and figure, guys. Well, all of that is to say that I believe this might explain why the Arrow 3 and THAAD systems, which thankfully are donated or given to us by the United States, did not intercept this missile like so many others before it had been intercepted. If it had a concrete warhead then, it would have had different flight characteristics than a missile that was carrying an explosive warhead. So maybe the computers, which are set up to track and intercept missiles that carry explosive warheads, weren't able to track and intercept this one. Well, thank God it didn't hit the terminal. Well, I'm literally not a rocket scientist, but there's a few things I know about rockets and the missiles which intercept them. I'm old enough to remember President Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. This was the idea that incoming missiles could be intercepted, including by using space-based lasers, prompting detractors to call it Star Wars and imply it was a fantasy. Indeed, when it was first proposed, people who really were rocket scientists said it would be like, quote, trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. And back then, with the computers and radars available at the time, they might have been right. But this technology has come a long way. And Israel has pioneered systems that showed the world you really can hit a bullet with a bullet, and we now consider it perfectly normal. Speaking of that, I wish my own golf balls would hit a hole-in-one on every 3 par possible. I guess that's like trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. But here's the thing, friends, it's still hitting a bullet with a bullet. And even as Israel and the United States have pioneered systems to do this, other countries, including Iran, are working on making missiles that are faster and able to elude these defensive systems. The Iranians claimed this week to have perfected a new missile with a range of 1,200 kilometers, which can elude the THAAD system, and they pointed to Sunday's incident here in Israel to prove it. But I don't think we should be fooled or intimidated by the Iranians by this. Like I said, it might have been a fluke because of the different warhead, or it might have just been a lucky shot. Whatever the explanation, it doesn't change the fact that Israeli and American air defense systems have successfully intercepted hundreds of missiles before this of all kinds, both here and in Israel and also in the Ukraine. Over recent years, we are seeing more and more of this happening. Now, these defensive systems definitely work most of the time, although they are expensive. In fact, the Arrow 3 cost $2.5 million a piece. And the THAAD interceptors cost $15 million apiece. Some people complain about the high price of these systems, but you have to weigh that against the cost in lives and money if you don't have them. And in this situation, we see that the impact of this one missile, even though there were no fatalities from it, has caused several international airlines to suspend service in and out of Ben Gurion Airport for at least several days, and that's already costing the Israeli economy tens of millions of dollars in both direct and indirect costs. Well, we'll talk more about Israel's economic problems and situation later in the report, but first I want to stay on the topic of missile defense for a few more moments. As I said, most of the time these interception systems, especially the Iron Dome, work just like they're supposed to do. But every once in a while a missile or rocket gets through. And even when the incoming weapons do get intercepted, there is shrapnel and debris which falls to the earth below, and it can hit people, vehicles, or buildings and cause a lot of deadly damage. That is why Israelis continue to run to shelters anytime the siren alerts them to an incoming rocket. So if we're at home or work, there's usually a sheltered space in the building which we can run to. But people can't live their whole lives like this. People, let me tell you, there are children for the last 20 years that have grown up in Israel from the time of birth until now that have grown up under rocket fire. What country on the face of the earth would put up with such abysmal kind of a situation? It's just catastrophic, if you ask me. A whole generation of children suffering through this. Well, anyways, children need to play outside. People need to take a bus to work, etc. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we've been busy for the past several years, and especially the last 20-some-odd months of this war, installing portable bomb safety shelters all over the country. There are many more places that still need a shelter, and we need your help to provide them. So please watch this short video about this vitally important project. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021 During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight in rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected.
Welcome back, everybody. Shalom. And now we turn to Israel's response to the Houthi attack on Sunday. Less than 30 hours later, in the early afternoon of Monday, 20 Israeli aircraft struck Houthi targets in Yemen, and according to the IDF statement, they destroyed military and economic infrastructure that enabled the Houthis to build and maintain their capacity to attack both Israel and international shipping in the Red Sea. On Tuesday afternoon, Israel hit the international airport in Sana'a in a direct response to the Houthi threat to impose an air blockade on Israel by relentlessly attacking and targeting our airports. Now, it's been a while since we talked about this, so let me quickly review the situation regarding the Houthis. They are a proxy force of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, just as Hezbollah is in Lebanon. And the sect of Islam they adhere to is very similar. It's what the Ayatollah regime also in Iran practices. Now, the Houthi are proxies of Iran, but they also have their own independent agenda, and the Iranians say that they don't have nearly as much control over them as they exert over other proxies. For the past 20 months they've been launching missiles at Israel and also attacking civilian merchant shipping that was trying to sail through the Bab el-Mandab Straits between the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. This is a major choke point for international commerce, and the Houthi attacks have forced shipping companies to divert their cargoes back and forth between Europe and the Far East around the southern tip of Africa. Well, that seems a long way to get around. This has cost these shipping companies billions of dollars, and they've passed these costs on to retailers, who have passed them on to consumers, including you and me, although I did get this nice purple sport coat at a good discounted price. Well, this has also cost Egypt a lot of money because they're not collecting transit fees from ships passing through the Suez Canal. About 6 weeks ago, the Trump administration in the United States decided that this situation had gone on far too long, and they decided to execute a campaign of airstrikes against the Houthis to try and force them to stop all this craziness. So the administration also told Israel to stop launching its own strikes against the Houthis, as it would complicate the American operation. Israel, which hit the Houthis with 4 airstrikes before the American campaign started, was fine with this arrangement because we're very busy with the ongoing conflict against Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Everyone thought the American campaign would quickly force the Houthis to stand down, but they apparently didn't get that memo or that sticky note because they haven't stopped shooting, even though they certainly have sustained serious damage. But Sunday's ballistic missile attack, which succeeded in landing a missile on Israeli soil, even if there were no fatalities, has once again changed Israel's calculus, and now a retaliatory strike was again necessary. This time, coordination with U.S. aircraft was necessary, and it's also historic. This is the first time Israeli and American forces have jointly attacked targets of a common enemy in the same country. There have been plenty of joint training exercises, and there have been many times when the two militaries have cooperated to defend against attacks. But this is the first time they have gone on the offensive together. Rah! Okay, that'll probably end up just being a footnote in the history books, but it's worth mentioning just the same as we see it happening before our very eyes. Now, this wasn't the only big effort the IDF was making this week. Notices have gone out over all of Israel to 70,000 reservists that it's time to once again report for duty so that preparations can be made for what the IDF is calling Operation Gideon's Chariots. This will be hopefully the last big effort needed to fully destroy what's left of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Putting pressure on Hamas to return the remaining hostages is also one of the stated goals of the new campaign. But if I can be perfectly honest, I don't believe there's any serious hope of that on the government's part at this point. I hate to sound cynical, guys, but there have been many indications in recent weeks that the leadership of this country, including our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have pretty much given up hope on getting any more hostages back alive. In fact, it has been explicitly declared that strategic victory over Hamas is more important than the hostages, and I'm afraid a large segment of the general population agrees with that for better or for worse. I just want you to know also, not only President Trump, but also from the Prime Minister's family, has said that there are no longer 24 hostages that remain alive, but the number is down to 21. It's so sad. And yet the total number of the living and the dead hostages left remaining in the Gaza Strip are 59. With that in mind, let me give you some details about this plan to launch Operation Gideon's Chariots. First, it's important to mention that it might not happen. Israel has let Hamas know that if they release the hostages before President Trump's planned visit to the region later in the month, the campaign might be called off. Once again, I don't believe the government believes this will happen, but it would be better for everyone if it did. Additionally, by putting this offer on the table, Israel also puts Hamas on the spot and sets them up to take the blame if the operation ends up getting launched. Now, if that happens, the plan is for the IDF to move in to take ground and hold it, hunting down all the Hamas operatives in the area while moving all the civilians out of it, while aggressively moving to demolish demolish, literally disintegrate all of Hamas's military infrastructure in that area. At the same time, the IDF is moving to initiate new procedures for distributing humanitarian aid in the Strip so that it won't be stolen by Hamas, but instead go directly to the civilian population for which it is meant. In a related story, Hamas was caught executing Gazan civilians. That's right, their own people this week, following accusations that they were stealing aid shipments and otherwise collaborating with Israel. This is an example of how Hamas rules the Gaza Strip and the civilian population of the Strip with cruelty and violence, not to mention hypocrisy and lies. But there are many more examples we could tell you about. Now, to give you a brief explanation, this strategy the IDF says it plans to use in the next phase of fighting has a technical name in counterinsurgency doctrine, and that's called clear and hold. The United States military employed it in Iraq with great success and attempted to do so in Afghanistan with less success. Any honest historian will tell you that it has a very mixed record, as armies from several different countries have employed versions of it in low to medium intensity conflicts all over the world going back decades. I hope it works for Israel at this time and we can finally bring this war to a successful conclusion. Oh God, help us all. Because candidly, life cannot go on the way it has been. This war has gone on now for almost 20 months, longer than any previous war. It's disrupted life more than any other event in Israel's history, and it is by far the most expensive war in Israel's history in both blood and treasure. And almost everyone in Israel has been personally touched by this war, knowing someone who lost their life or was wounded or was displaced or is suffering from PTSD symptoms. Now, beyond that, the government has spent a staggering amount of money on this war, and the bills just keep adding up, leaving less and less money for everything else. Now, cracks in the system are beginning to show, and on this past Sunday morning, even as the news was coming in about the Houthi missile that landed near the airport, most of the teachers in Israel were on a warning strike, and that includes kindergartners as well. It was because the government had made a surprise announcement that their salaries would be cut by almost 4% across the board. And that's crazy because teachers don't make a lot of money in Israel. Now, since then, the teachers' union and the finance ministry negotiated that down to a pay cut of just less than 1%. But that's still bad news for teachers who already have, as I said, some of the lowest salaries in Israel. This breaks my heart, personally, because I know how hard teachers work, and they have one of the most important jobs in society, helping children grow up and learn and develop despite all the rocket attacks. But it isn't only the teachers. Many people in Israel are struggling right now because of this war and all the strains it has put on our finances, on families, on businesses, both big and small, and just in general on the whole society. So here at Vision for Israel, we're doing everything we can to help during this time of great distress and stress for all our country, but we need your help to do more. So please, once again, watch this short video about some of the projects we have to try and help Israeli families in financial and emotional distress, both to Jews and Arabs alike. Thank you for watching this. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends, and now to continue with the news, bucking the narrative that Israel is increasingly isolated in the international community. Heads of states from both Cyprus and Ecuador were in Jerusalem this past week for meetings with Prime Minister Netanyahu aimed at increasing trade and mutual investment. Both countries sent assistance to Israel last week to help fight the massive forest fires which burned forested areas outside of Jerusalem, and Netanyahu had nothing but warm words of gratitude for this. There were also new agreements announced covering trade, tourism, and a variety of other issues. Israel's domestic economy is hurting, but there is some good news on the long-term horizon. Many countries around the world are eager to buy things we produce here in Israel, and there are good indications of a bounce back in tourism as soon as people can feel safe again to visit Israel. And I want to recommend all of you start making your plans and bring a tour, even if it's 15, 20 people. Plan on 2026 if you can't come this year. Speaking of international relations, the negotiations between the United States and Iran over that country's nuclear weapons program are continuing at a very slow pace, like a turtle, and I am quite certain from the Iranian standpoint, it's quite intentional. Iran has every interest in dragging these negotiations out for as long as they can, while their scientists and their technicians continue making steady technical progress towards getting nuclear weapons. For that matter, analysts who are closely watching these negotiations say that the agreement which is beginning to come into view is very similar to the 2015 JCPOA agreement that was brokered by the Obama administration and which President Trump pulled America out of during his first term in 2018. Now, Netanyahu has hinted that he's willing to strike Iran even without initial U.S. support, especially in light of the Houthi attacks, which he says Iran should be held responsible for. That's probably a bit of a stretch, but Netanyahu has been shouting from the rooftops about Iran for decades, and his political career, to say nothing of this time on this mortal plane, might soon be coming to an end. For the last 2 weeks, I've been saying that it's now or never to hit Iran's nuclear project with massive kinetic force, and I'm sure Bibi Netanyahu would agree with me. So with all that in mind, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's better than a 50-50 chance that at some point before the end of this summer, which just started, Netanyahu will go for it and let the history books sort it all out. So brace yourselves however you need to, friends, and remember you heard it here first on the VFI News. Or maybe not, because I'm probably not the only one talking about this stuff, but you love me anyways. Now, speaking of this stuff, there is, of course, another strong possibility, and that is that Iran will feel itself backed into a corner and decide to try and lash out at Israel in a preemptive strike. A moment ago, I mentioned that Benjamin Netanyahu is painfully aware that his mortal frame won't last forever. But Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dealing with the same health issues, as well as many other issues which might make him feel like it's now or never to try and make it good on all the threats he's been making for so many years. He's been making these, and I will remind you what Scripture says. I will bless those that bless thee and curse those that curse thee. So this guy's in trouble, if you ask me. Now, this week, Iranian officials have been making their usual threats, saying that their silos of ballistic missiles are full and ready to unleash fury on Israel, bearing Tel Aviv to the ground. Yeah, of course, blah, blah, blah. Like they always say. And I've been hearing them make these threats for longer than many of the people have been watching this report and have been alive, and I'm very tired of it. But the thing is, as much as we'd like to, we can't ignore these guys, because the one time we do, that'll be the one time they actually try to do something, and we have to have learned our lessons from October 7th, 2023. They've already launched 2 large barrages of ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, once last April and then again in October of 2024. These barrages were not very effective, and they made excuses that they had been warning us that hadn't been meant to cause serious damage, but next time could be very different. Once again, I'd like to roll my eyes at this, but the risk is too great to do that, so please keep praying for wisdom for the leaders of Israel, the United States, and other powers involved in the standoff with Iran, and pray for Israel's civilian population to prepare for whatever is coming next. We're in a prophetic season of history, friends. Of that, there can be no doubt. And we all need to keep our eyes and our ears and our hearts, both physical and spiritual, wide open. Now, one way to do that is by keeping an eye on news reports like this one. And on that note, I'd like to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news. So I have a couple items to share with you. First reports out of Iran indicate that the regime has had to institute rolling blackouts in big cities because not enough electrical power is being generated to meet demand. This will add another difficulty to their race for nuclear weapons and increase pressure on the regime in various ways. Here in Israel, we had a late-season rainstorm in the Negev earlier last week, which went a long way towards closing the gap in the region's annual average precipitation and breaking the drought everyone's worried about. So until next week, friends, let it rain, both in your hearts and upon the land of Israel. I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of the VFI News in Israel. God bless you and shalom.